The rain had stopped, but the streets were still slick with water, reflecting the glow of city lights. Andrew Holmes stepped into the small cafe, expecting nothing more than a quick coffee before heading back to work. But just as he reached for his phone, a quiet sniffle caught his attention. He turned, spotting a little boy standing near the corner, his blonde hair slightly messy, his blue eyes shimmering with unshed tears. Andrew wasn't the kind of man who got involved in strangers' problems. But something about the child, his lost expression, the way he clutched his tiny hands together, made him pause. Then the boy looked up at him and whispered, "I can't find my mommy." Andrew's chest tightened. He didn't know it yet, but in the next few moments, his entire world was about to change. The rain had stopped an hour ago, leaving the streets damp and the air thick with the scent of wet pavement and freshly brewed coffee. Andrew Holmes wasn't supposed to be here. He rarely ventured into small cafes like this, preferring the sleek, professional atmosphere of the high-end places his colleagues frequented. But today had been an exhausting day filled with back-to-back meetings, and for once, he wanted a quiet moment away from the towering walls of his office. As he stepped inside, the scent of roasted coffee beans and something sweet filled the air. The cafe was small and cozy, with mismatched chairs and warm yellow lights casting a soft glow over the handful of customers sitting at their tables. Andrew barely paid attention to his surroundings as he pulled out his phone, intending to check his emails while he waited for his order. Then he heard it. A small, muffled sob. At first, he ignored it. The city was full of noise, people rushing, conversations overlapping, the distant hum of traffic outside. But this was different. It was quiet, almost hidden, like someone was trying not to be noticed. Andrew turned his head slightly and spotted a small figure standing near the corner of the cafe. A little boy, no older than 4, was standing alone, his tiny hands gripping the edge of a wooden table. His blonde hair was slightly messy, and his bright blue eyes that looked strangely familiar, were filled with unshed tears. He kept glancing around, his lower lip trembling as if he were trying very hard not to cry. Andrew frowned. Something wasn't right. The boy was alone. There was no adult hovering nearby, no parent watching him. Against his better judgment, Andrew slipped his phone into his pocket and walked over. He wasn't particularly good with kids. He didn't dislike them, but he had never spent much time around them either. His life had always been about business, efficiency, and control. This situation was none of those things. He crouched down, making sure not to startle the boy. "Hey, buddy. You okay?" The boy startled slightly, his blue eyes widening as he looked up at Andrew. For a moment, he seemed unsure whether to answer, his small hands tightening around the edge of the table. Andrew softened his voice. "Are you here with someone?" The boy hesitated, then sniffled. "My mommy." Andrew glanced around again. "Where is she?" The boy's lip wobbled, and this time, a tear spilled over. I don't know." His voice was small, barely above a whisper. "I lost her." Andrew felt something unexpected twist in his chest. The boy was scared, truly scared. He wasn't just waiting for his mother, he was lost. "Okay," Andrew said gently. "What's your name?" The boy wiped at his eyes with the sleeve of his small jacket. "Olivier." Andrew nodded. "That's a great name. All right, Olivier, let's figure this out. Do you remember where you last saw your mom?" Olivier shook his head quickly. "She was working. She told me to stay in the back, but I got bored, and now I can't find her." His voice cracked slightly at the last part, like he was afraid he had done something terribly wrong. Andrew's jaw tightened. She was working, that meant she had to be somewhere in the cafe. He stood up and turned toward the counter, where a barista was taking an order from a customer. Andrew stepped forward, gently placing a hand on Olivier's shoulder to reassure him. "Excuse me," Andrew said, his voice calm but firm. This boy is lost. He said his mother works here. Can you help find her? The barista's eyes widened in recognition as she glanced down at Olivier. Oh no. That's Lily's son. She turned toward the back of the cafe and raised her voice. Lily. Come quick. Footsteps sounded from the employee entrance at the back of the cafe. Andrew barely had time to process it before a woman came rushing out, her expression panicked as she searched the room. And then she froze. Her gaze landed on Olivier first, her entire body sagging with relief. But then her eyes lifted, just for a second, and locked onto him. Andrew went completely still. He knew those eyes. That face. That voice, when she gasped softly in shock. Standing in front of him was Lillian Brooks. The woman who had vanished from his life 4 years ago. The woman who had once meant everything to him. The woman who was now holding on to a little boy who had his blue eyes. Lillian Brooks couldn't breathe. For a split second, the relief of finding her son safe overwhelmed everything else. She dropped to her knees, pulling Olivier into her arms, running her hands over his hair, his cheeks, making sure he was unharmed. You scared me, baby, she whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. I told you to stay in the back. Olivier sniffled but clung to her. I'm sorry, Mommy. I didn't mean to. She exhaled shakily, holding him tighter. But then she looked up. And that's when the weight of reality came crashing down on her. Andrew Holmes was standing right in front of her. Her chest tightened, her breath catching in her throat. It had been 4 years since she had seen him, and yet he still looked the same, sharp suit, piercing blue eyes, the same presence that always made a room feel smaller when he walked in. But there was something different about the way he was looking at her now. It wasn't just shock. It wasn't just disbelief. It was realization. He had seen Olivier. He had looked at him. And he had put the pieces together. For the longest second of her life, neither of them spoke. Andrew's gaze flickered between her and the boy still wrapped in her arms, his jaw tightening, his entire body tense. Then, finally, his voice cut through the thick silence. Is he mine? Lillian's stomach dropped. She had played this moment out in her head 1,000 times over the years, imagining what she would say if she ever saw him again. She had convinced herself she had prepared for it. But now that she was here, with Andrew standing in front of her, with his son in her arms, she felt like she was going to collapse. Olivier, unaware of the storm brewing between the adults, turned his head slightly. Mommy? Lillian swallowed hard. Olivier, sweetheart, why don't you go sit over there for a second? I'll be right with you. He hesitated but nodded, rubbing his eyes as he climbed into one of the cafe chairs nearby. As soon as he was out of earshot, Andrew took a step closer, his voice lower but no less intense. Answer me, ***. Lillian's fingers curled into her palms, her entire body screaming at her to run. But there was nowhere left to go. She forced herself to look him in the eye. Yes, she whispered. He's yours. Andrew inhaled sharply, as if she had punched him. Lillian could see the storm behind his eyes, the way his breathing slowed, his hands clenching at his sides as he processed the truth. She didn't know what reaction she had expected, but when he finally spoke, it wasn't anger. It was something worse. You never told me, he said, his voice low, almost unreadable. For years, Lily. She flinched at the name. No one had called her that in years. She stopped, realizing she didn't even know what to say. There were no excuses that could undo what she had done. Andrew ran a hand through his hair, his movements sharp and tense. Why? Lillian closed her eyes for a second. She had to steady herself. She had to explain. I was scared, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. You were so focused on your career, on your company, on building your empire. We were already falling apart when I found out I was pregnant, Andrew. You made it clear that you didn't have time for family. I thought if I told you, you'd offer financial support, but nothing more. Andrew's expression darkened. So you made that decision for me? Lillian's throat tightened. I thought I was doing what was best for him. He let out a short, humorless laugh. What was best? You think keeping my own son from me was what was best? Lillian looked away. Andrew exhaled sharply, his hands bracing on his hips as he turned slightly, as if trying to calm himself down. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The tension was suffocating. Then, suddenly, his voice was calmer. But there was steel beneath it. I want to know him. Lillian's head snapped up. What? Andrew looked at her, his blue eyes unwavering. I want to know him. I lost 4 years, Lily. I won't lose any more. Panic gripped her. She had spent so long keeping their lives separate, convincing herself she had done the right thing. But now, standing here, facing the man she had once loved, seeing the way his entire world had just been turned upside down, she realized that she had no idea what came next. Andrew, I'm not asking, he interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. He's my son, and I'm going to be part of his life. Whether you like it or not. Lillian stared at him, her heart pounding. She wanted to argue. She wanted to fight. But deep down, she knew he was right. She had taken his choice away once. She couldn't do it again. Finally, she exhaled, her shoulders sagging in defeat. Okay. Andrew nodded once. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't resolution. But it was a start. Andrew barely slept that night. His mind refused to slow down, every thought colliding with the next. He had gone to that cafe expecting nothing more than a quick coffee break, a moment of silence before diving back into work. Instead, he had walked out knowing he had a son. A son he had never met, a son he had never been given the chance to love, a son who had spent 4 years growing up without him. By morning, he had made a decision. He wasn't going to let another day pass without getting to know Olivier. He had already lost too much time. He arrived at the cafe earlier than agreed, his nerves betraying him in a way they never had before. He had closed billion-dollar deals without blinking, taken risks in business that could have cost him everything, but none of it compared to the uncertainty he felt now. Meeting his own son shouldn't feel like stepping into unknown territory, but it did. The moment he walked in, his eyes searched for them. Lillian was already there, sitting at a small table near the window with Olivier beside her. The boy was swinging his feet under the chair, focused on the plate of pancakes in front of him. Andrew forced himself to take a breath before stepping forward. Lillian looked up first, her expression guarded but calm. She had barely spoken after agreeing to let him be part of Olivier's life, and now, as she studied him, he could tell she was still trying to figure out if she had made the right decision. Olivier glanced up next, his mouth still full of pancake. He blinked at Andrew, then swallowed quickly. You came back, he said, sounding surprised. Andrew's chest tightened at how innocent the statement was. Did he think he wouldn't? Had he already learned not to expect people to stay? I told you I would, Andrew said, pulling out the chair across from them. I keep my promises. Olivier studied him, as if deciding whether or not to believe that. Then he nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer. Lillian cleared her throat, shifting slightly in her seat. We were just having breakfast. I wasn't sure what time you'd get here. I didn't want to be late. Andrew glanced at Olivier's plate, then at the extra one sitting nearby. Did you order for me? Lillian hesitated. I wasn't sure if you'd want anything. Olivier, however, seemed to have no doubts. You can have some of mine, he offered, pushing his plate forward slightly. Mommy says sharing is good. Andrew's lips twitched, amusement slipping through the tension. She's right. He picked up a fork and took a small bite, ignoring the way Lillian watched him as if she was trying to read his every move. The pancakes were slightly cold, but he barely noticed. Olivier grinned. You like pancakes? Andrew nodded. Yeah. Haven't had them in a while, though. The boy gasped. How come? Andrew hesitated, realizing he didn't have an answer that didn't sound ridiculous now. Guess I've been too busy. Olivier frowned. Too busy for pancakes. Andrew glanced at Lillian, who was looking down at her coffee as if she didn't want to get involved. He looked back at Olivier. Too busy for a lot of things. The words hung between them for a moment, but Olivier didn't dwell on them. He simply went back to eating, seemingly content that his pancakes were now being shared. Lillian finally spoke. I don't know what you want out of this, Andrew. He met her gaze. I want time with my son. She exhaled. It's not that simple. It is to me, he said firmly. I don't want to disrupt his life. I don't want to confuse him. But I'm not walking away. Lillian looked at him for a long moment, as if weighing his words, trying to find cracks in them. Finally, she sighed. We can start slow. Short visits. Time together. I won't force him into anything he's not ready for. Andrew nodded. That's fair. Olivier looked between them, then tilted his head. Does this mean you're gonna be around more? Andrew's throat tightened. Yeah, kid. It does. The boy considered that for a moment, then smiled. Okay. Just like that, the tension in the room shifted. It wasn't gone, not completely, but it was lighter. Easier. Lillian still looked hesitant, still unsure if she was making the right choice, but Andrew could see it now, the small flicker of hope in her eyes. And as Olivier chattered about his favorite cartoons and how he wanted to learn how to ride a bike, Andrew realized something. This wasn't going to be easy. But for the first time in his life, he wanted to fight for something more than just success. Andrew had never been the type to hesitate. In business, in decision-making, in every aspect of his life, he had always been sure of himself. But standing outside Lillian's apartment door, he felt something unfamiliar, uncertainty. It had been a week since their breakfast at the cafe, a week since Olivier had looked up at him with bright blue eyes and asked if he was going to stay. Andrew had kept his promise, meeting them every day, slowly becoming part of his son's routine. Short walks to the park, afternoon visits to the cafe where Lillian worked, and long conversations about dinosaurs and superheroes. It was new, strange, and overwhelming in ways he hadn't expected. But it also felt right. Lillian had been careful. She never left them completely alone, always staying within earshot, always watching. He understood. She was still figuring out if she could trust him, if he would follow through. And in truth, so was he. Today was different. Today, for the first time, Lillian had invited him into their home. Andrew knocked twice, shifting slightly as he waited. The door opened a few moments later, and Lillian stood there, her brown eyes scanning his face like she was still deciding if this was a good idea. She stepped aside without a word, letting him in. The apartment was small but warm. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting soft golden light over the modest furniture. A few children's books were scattered on the couch, and toy cars were lined up neatly on the coffee table, almost as if Olivier had placed them there with careful precision. It wasn't what Andrew was used to, his world was sleek, modern, designed with purpose. This space felt lived in, like a home in a way his penthouse never had. From the hallway, Olivier's voice rang out, excited and full of energy. "Mommy, is he here?" Lillian barely had time to answer before Olivier came running into the living room, a wide grin on his face. His blonde hair was still slightly damp from a bath, and he was wearing pajamas covered in tiny rocket ships. He skidded to a stop in front of Andrew, eyes bright with excitement. "You came," he said, almost like he had still been expecting Andrew to change his mind. Andrew crouched down, meeting him at eye level. "I told you I would." Olivier's smile widened, and without thinking, he grabbed Andrew's hand and tugged him toward the couch. "Come see what I made." Andrew let himself be pulled along, surprised by how naturally it came. He sat down as Olivier climbed up beside him, proudly pointing to a pile of colorful blocks stacked carefully on the coffee table. "It's a space station," Olivier explained, his voice filled with pride. "For astronauts and aliens." Andrew studied it with the seriousness it deserved. "Looks impressive. Think there's room for more astronauts?" Olivier nodded eagerly. "Yeah. We can build more." Andrew reached for a handful of blocks, letting the boy take the lead as they worked together. He wasn't sure how much time passed, but at some point, Lillian sat down across from them, watching quietly. "You're good with him," she said after a while, her voice softer than before. Andrew glanced at her. "I'm trying." She exhaled, tucking her legs under her on the couch. "He's still figuring all of this out." "So am I." Andrew placed a small block carefully on top of their growing structure. "I get it. But I don't plan on going anywhere, Lillian." She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decide if she truly believed that. Olivier, oblivious to the weight of their conversation, turned to Andrew with wide eyes. "Can we go to the park tomorrow?" Andrew didn't hesitate. "Absolutely." Lillian sighed, but there was a small smile on her lips. "Guess that means I'm taking the afternoon off." Andrew met her gaze. "Or I can take him myself." Her expression shifted instantly, guarded again. "It's too soon for that." Andrew didn't argue. He wasn't going to push. "Then we all go," he said simply. Lillian relaxed slightly, as if reassured by the compromise. Olivier, however, had already moved on, picking up his space station and setting it carefully on the table like it was the most important thing in the world. Andrew wasn't sure where this road would lead, but for the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about the future. He wasn't strategizing or planning ahead. For once, he was simply here. And it felt right. The next afternoon, Andrew found himself in an unfamiliar situation, standing in a park, holding a juice box, and watching a 4-year-old run circles around him with boundless energy. He had faced high-stakes negotiations, ruthless boardroom battles, and billion-dollar mergers, but nothing had prepared him for keeping up with a child who never seemed to get tired. Olivier raced across the playground, his laughter ringing through the air as he climbed the jungle gym with surprising speed. His small hands gripped the bars tightly as he made his way to the top, then turned to wave at Andrew proudly. "Look how high I am." Andrew nodded, shielding his eyes from the afternoon sun. "That's pretty impressive." Lillian, standing a few feet away, let out a soft laugh. "He climbs everything. It's like he has no fear." Andrew glanced at her, sensing the fond exasperation in her voice. She was dressed casually today, her hair tied back, looking far more relaxed than she had in their previous meetings. It was the first time he had seen her outside of work, outside of the cafe, in a setting that felt normal. "He gets that from you," he said, watching as Olivier carefully began his descent. Lillian arched a brow. "You think so?" Andrew smirked. "You never back down from a challenge either." She exhaled, looking away. That was a long time ago. Andrew knew what she meant. Their past was complicated. There had been a time when they had been inseparable, when he had believed she would always be by his side. But somewhere along the way, ambition had taken over, priorities had shifted, and she had left, without a word, without an explanation. Until now. Olivier came running back toward them, his cheeks flushed from the heat, a big grin stretched across his face. I want to go on the swings. Andrew gestured toward the empty swings nearby. Then let's go. Olivier grabbed his hand without hesitation, and Andrew felt an unexpected warmth spread through his chest at the simple, trusting gesture. He followed the boy to the swings, lifting him up onto the seat before stepping behind him. You ready? Olivier nodded eagerly. Push me high. Andrew chuckled. Not too high. Your mom might kill me. From behind them, Lillian snorted. That's accurate. Andrew gave Olivier a firm push, watching as the boy swung forward, his laughter filling the air. He pushed again, falling into a rhythm, listening as Olivier talked about his favorite cartoons, his favorite snacks, the new shoes he wanted because they made you run extra fast. It was strange. He had only known this boy for a short time, but every second with him felt natural, like something that had always been meant to happen. After a while, Olivier slowed down, dragging his feet in the sand to stop the swing. He turned to Andrew with an inquisitive expression. Hey, mister. Andrew smirked. Still calling me mister, huh? Olivier tilted his head. What should I call you? Andrew hesitated, glancing briefly at Lillian. She was watching them closely, but she didn't say anything. He looked back at Olivier, keeping his voice steady. You can call me whatever you want, buddy. Olivier seemed to think about it for a long moment. Then, with a small, confident nod, he grinned. Okay, Andrew. Something inside him twisted unexpectedly. It wasn't rejection, he hadn't expected Olivier to immediately call him Dad. He hadn't earned that yet. But hearing his name from his son's mouth, spoken so easily, so naturally, felt like a step. A small but important step. Andrew smiled. Yeah, buddy. Olivier hopped off the swing and took his hand. I want to get ice cream. Can we? Andrew glanced at Lillian, silently asking for permission. She sighed but smiled. All right. But no chocolate, he gets it everywhere. Olivier groaned. Mommy. Andrew laughed, ruffling the boy's hair. Let's go get some ice cream, kid. As they walked away from the swings, Olivier's small hand still wrapped in his, Andrew realized something. He had spent years believing success was measured by numbers, by power, by the next big deal. But this moment, this connection, this growing trust, felt more important than anything else. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about what came next. He was just here. And he didn't want to be anywhere else. The sun had started to set by the time they reached the small ice cream shop at the corner of the street. Olivier tugged on Andrew's hand, practically bouncing with excitement as he scanned the colorful menu displayed on the glass counter. His blue eyes lit up as he pointed eagerly at the flavors, his energy never seeming to fade. I want vanilla, Olivier announced, pressing his face against the glass. With rainbow sprinkles. Andrew smirked, glancing at Lillian, who shook her head with an amused sigh. You always get vanilla, she teased. Olivier turned to her, eyes wide with mock offense. Because it's the best. Andrew chuckled, stepping up to the counter. Vanilla with rainbow sprinkles, got it. He glanced at Lillian. And for you? She hesitated, her arms crossing lightly over her chest. I'm fine. Andrew raised a brow. You don't like ice cream? Lillian rolled her eyes. Of course I do, I just. Mommy likes strawberry, Olivier interrupted with a knowing grin. But she never gets it for herself. Andrew looked at her pointedly, waiting for her to argue, but she just sighed, giving her son a look before muttering, fine. Strawberry. A few minutes later, they sat outside at one of the small metal tables, the evening air cool but pleasant. Olivier was fully focused on his ice cream, happily licking at the melting swirls as he swung his feet under the chair. Andrew watched him for a moment before turning to Lillian. You really weren't going to get anything? She shrugged, taking a small bite of her ice cream. I just don't usually think about it. It's not a big deal. Andrew frowned slightly. It is if it's something you like. Lillian's expression flickered, as if the words caught her off guard. She stared down at her cup for a moment before shaking her head. I guess I've just gotten used to putting him first. Andrew glanced at Olivier, who was now carefully placing sprinkles on his spoon before eating them one by one. I get that, he said quietly. But it doesn't mean you don't deserve things for yourself too. Lillian looked up at him, something unreadable in her eyes. He could see the hesitation, the years of doing everything alone, the quiet strength that had kept her going. He knew she had done what she thought was best, even if he would never agree with the choice she made to keep Olivier from him. Why did you really leave? He asked after a pause, keeping his voice steady. I need to know the truth. Lillian inhaled deeply, her fingers tightening around her spoon. I already told you, she said quietly. I was scared. You were so focused on work, on building your company, on things that had nothing to do with family. I convinced myself that if I told you, you'd feel obligated, but not involved. I thought you'd throw money at the situation, but that you wouldn't actually want to be part of his life. Andrew's jaw clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. You never gave me a chance. She flinched slightly, guilt flashing in her eyes. I know. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. You think I wouldn't have wanted him? Lillian shook her head. I didn't know, Andrew. I honestly didn't know. And by the time I thought about telling you, too much time had passed. I was afraid of what you'd say, what you'd do. I didn't want Olivier to be some afterthought in your life. He deserved more than that. Andrew looked at her, and for the first time, he saw it, not just the woman who had left, not just the person who had made a choice that hurt him, but a mother who had done what she thought was right, even if it had been wrong. He glanced at Olivier, who was now happily humming to himself as he continued decorating his ice cream with sprinkles. He had missed so much, his first steps, his first words, all the little moments that made up a child's life. I can't get those years back, he said finally, his voice quieter. But I'm not going anywhere now. Lillian studied him, her brown eyes searching his face as if trying to find something solid to hold on to. Slowly, she nodded. I know. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't everything he wanted to hear. But it was a start. Olivier suddenly turned to them, completely unaware of the heaviness of their conversation. Can we get ice cream again tomorrow? Andrew smirked, reaching out to ruffle the boy's hair. You trying to make this a tradition? Olivier grinned. Maybe. Lillian laughed softly, shaking her head. Not every day, kiddo. Olivier pouted but then turned to Andrew. But you'll come back, right? Andrew didn't hesitate. Yeah, buddy. I'll be here. And for the first time, he knew he meant it. A week had passed since that evening at the ice cream shop, and something had shifted. Andrew had been consistent, showing up every day, spending time with Olivier, proving that he wasn't just passing through their lives. Lillian still kept her guard up, but there were moments, small ones, where he could see it cracking. Moments when she didn't look at him with skepticism, but with something softer, something closer to trust. Tonight, he was sitting on Lillian's couch, watching as Olivier carefully arranged his toys in neat rows on the floor. The boy had insisted on showing Andrew his favorite action figures, explaining in detail which ones were heroes and which were villains. Andrew listened, genuinely invested, letting Olivier ramble about imaginary battles and secret missions. Lillian was in the kitchen, moving quietly as she made tea. It was the first time she had let her guard down enough to let him stay this long. Usually, she found an excuse to end their visits early, always keeping things controlled. But tonight, she hadn't rushed him out. That felt like progress. Olivier suddenly turned, tilting his head curiously. Do you have a house? Andrew nodded. Yeah, I do. Is it big? Andrew smirked. Kind of. Olivier's brow furrowed as he thought about that. Is it lonely? The question caught Andrew off guard. He wasn't sure why, but it did. He had never considered his home lonely before. It was sleek, modern, perfectly designed. It was functional, efficient. But it had never been warm. Sometimes, he admitted. Olivier nodded, as if that made perfect sense to him. You should get a fish. Andrew raised an eyebrow. A fish? Yeah, Olivier said seriously. They don't talk, but they keep you company. From the kitchen, Lillian let out a quiet laugh. He's obsessed with fish. Olivier turned to her, crossing his arms. Because they're cool. Andrew chuckled. All right, you've convinced me. Maybe I'll get one. Olivier grinned. Can I help pick it? Andrew nodded. Of course. The boy looked pleased, as if that was the most important decision in the world. He went back to his toys, content, and Andrew found himself watching him, still unable to believe how much he had missed. Lillian walked over then, handing him a mug of tea. I still can't believe you're considering getting a pet. Andrew smirked. Things change. She sat down across from him, exhaling softly. Yeah. They do. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The past still lingered between them, unspoken but heavy. There were things they still needed to say, wounds that hadn't healed. But something about this moment felt different. Lillian set her mug down, looking at him carefully. You really want this, don't you? Andrew met her gaze, no hesitation in his voice. More than anything. She studied him, searching for cracks, for doubt, but she didn't find any. Slowly, she nodded. Okay, she said softly. Andrew didn't know what that meant exactly, but he knew one thing. It was more than she had ever given him before. And that was enough. For now. Andrew hadn't realized how much his life had changed until one quiet evening, when he found himself sitting on the floor of Lillian's living room, helping Olivier build a racetrack for his toy cars. Just a few weeks ago, his days had been filled with nothing but meetings, deadlines, and the endless chase for success. But now, here he was, completely immersed in something as simple as setting up tiny ramps and loops while Olivier excitedly explained the rules of his imaginary race. Okay, so this one is the fastest, Olivier said, holding up a red car. But this one, he picked up a blue one, is the best at jumping. Andrew nodded seriously. That's a strong strategy. Are we racing? Olivier grinned. Yeah. But you have to pick a good car. Not a slow one. Andrew pretended to think hard before choosing a sleek black car. How about this one? Olivier examined it, then nodded approvingly. That's a good one. But mine is still gonna win. Andrew smirked. We'll see about that. Lillian sat on the couch, watching them with an expression Andrew couldn't quite place. It wasn't hesitation anymore, not exactly. It was something softer, something closer to acceptance. She had been letting him in, little by little, but he knew she was still wary. He understood. Trust wasn't built overnight, and he had missed years of their lives. He couldn't just expect her to forget that. As they set up their cars, Olivier suddenly turned to Andrew with a question that made him pause. Are you gonna be here tomorrow? Andrew didn't hesitate. Yeah, buddy. I will. Olivier grinned, satisfied with that answer, then went back to positioning his car at the starting line. Andrew glanced at Lillian. She was still watching him, but this time, when their eyes met, she didn't look away. Later that night, after Olivier had fallen asleep, Andrew helped Lillian clean up the living room. It was a quiet, comfortable silence, one that felt almost natural. Lillian finally spoke. He's getting attached to you. Andrew set down a toy car, turning to face her fully. I want him to. I want to be here for him. She exhaled, running a hand through her hair. It still scares me. He nodded. I know. But I'm not going anywhere, Lillian. She looked at him for a long moment before sighing. I'm starting to believe that. Andrew felt something in his chest loosen. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't everything he wanted. But it was something. As he left that night, he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about making up for lost time. This was about building a future, one he would never walk away from again. The ending of this story is more than just a resolution, it's a testament to growth, redemption, and the power of second chances. Andrew starts as a man consumed by success, believing his life is complete until he stumbles upon the truth he never knew existed. His transformation isn't immediate, and that's what makes it so meaningful. He doesn't just claim the title of father, he earns it, one small moment at a time. Lillian's journey is just as powerful. She is not simply an obstacle or a love interest, she is a mother who made a choice out of fear and self-preservation. Her hesitation isn't about punishing Andrew but about protecting her son. Watching her slowly let down her walls, not just for Olivier's sake but for her own, adds depth to the story. She learns that she doesn't have to carry the burden alone anymore, that trusting Andrew doesn't mean losing control, it means gaining a partner. But at the heart of it all is Olivier, the innocent soul who brings them together. His trust, his curiosity, and his simple belief in love make the story shine. He doesn't need grand gestures, he just needs presence, consistency, and the quiet reassurance that Andrew isn't going anywhere. The moment he asks, "Are you coming back tomorrow?" and Andrew answers without hesitation is more powerful than any dramatic declaration. This ending isn't about perfection. It doesn't wrap everything up neatly, because real life doesn't work that way. It's about starting over, about learning to trust, about realizing that family isn't built on the past but on the choices we make moving forward. And the most beautiful part? Andrew isn't thinking about what comes next in his career, his wealth, or his legacy. He's thinking about Olivier. About being there. And that, more than anything, proves just how much he has changed.